Good evening. Oh, you're getting so good at that. It's so nice to see everyone this evening. Now, housekeeping is going to be real fun this time around because I get to crack down. Students, there are clickers in the bookstore as of right now, meaning everyone who doesn't have a clicker, you got to go get one. Graduate students, I've heard but I'm only using clickers once in this class. Do I really need to get one? Yes. Yes, you do. And you can rent a clicker for pretty cheap. So anyone who thinks that you're not going to use it past this course, just go rent one. I heard it's cheap, $10. That was the first housekeeping thing. The second and that also means that there will be no sign-ins next week. That means everyone will be using their clickers next week because the bookstore has them. The second thing, I have heard that there has been lots of distraction with people being on their computers on the internet during this course. Very disappointed to hear that. I hope that everyone who has your laptop open, if you need to have your laptop open to take notes, is actually taking notes and is not on Facebook. Can I get a commitment from y'all? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Other than that, I am really pleased about tonight's lecture because many of the things that we've been talking about week to week feed into nutrition and diet-related disease. And so we're going to be learning quite a bit this week. I want your questions to be really, really good, as they have been, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So, to introduce our speakers today, Patricia Crawford. Whoa. I didn't spill the water, don't worry. Patricia Crawford is the director of the Dr. Robert C. and Veronica Atkins Center for Weight and Health at UC Berkeley, which is great. For more than 20 years, she has conducted research in the prevention of childhood obesity. She's currently leading studies evaluating the impact of legislation to improve the foods in California schools, examining implementation of school wellness policies, and evaluating the impact of large-scale community interventions to create healthy food and activity environments for children. So really looking forward to Patricia Crawford. Also, Dr. Robert Lustig. He's a professor of pediatrics in the Division of Endocrinology and the director of the Weight Assessment for Teen and Child Health at UCSF. He studies neuroendocrinology. Wow. With a specific emphasis on the regulation of energy balance by the central nervous system. Dr. Lustig has authored over 85 research articles and 45 chapters. He is the former chairman of the Obesity Task Force of the Pediatric Endocrine Society, a member of the Obesity Task Force of the Endocrine Society, and on the board of directors of the American Heart Association of the Bay Area. Please, please give a warm welcome now for Patricia Crawford, because we're going to be hearing from her first.
Perfect. And there's a few that you'll have to scroll. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the nice introduction, Nikki. I am thrilled to be here. I think this class is such an important first for UC Berkeley. So I've been here for much of my career. I wanted to tell you in my short time here, I'm going to talk about the nutrition field and how it's changing. I'm going to talk about how obesity is a change agent. I'm going to talk about what UC Berkeley is doing, and then strategic evaluation and synthesis of the evidence and disseminating this information. So I thought I'd start with talking a little bit about how nutrition is changing, because many of you have recollection from early nutrition education, and you may have recollections from what your parents have said, that it has really changed during the period when obesity has been growing during these last 30, 40 years. That when I started off doing work here with children, I was looking at vitamin and mineral deficiencies. And now we're looking more at chronic disease prevention. We start off by looking at very specific RDAs, recommended dietary allowances, and now we have dietary reference intakes that tell you how much, if you get too much of nutrients, too many, what the problems are with too many, too few. But also, more important than that, that the nutrient guidance, much of that has been converted into food guidance during this same period. Very important. When I first started, we were dealing more with how to do behavioral modification and how to get people to eat what we wanted them to eat. And now we talk more about how to change the environment and make it easier for people to eat what we think, people should be eating and what people really want to eat also. And then, of course, the very issues of which nutrients we're looking at has changed as well. We were very involved with polyunsaturated fats, saturated fats, proteins, and now we talk more about trans fats, fructose, and phytochemicals. Phytochemicals I wanted to just bring up briefly because these are plant chemicals that appear to be protective against disease, but we don't know too much about them. We know which ones are in which foods. We know that a lot of fruits and vegetables have them. We know that color is important. This came out of a book a few years ago that I thought was really cute on what color is your diet, so I wanted to put it up because that's so important when we're talking about fruits and vegetables. But I think there's a really important lesson in these important phytochemicals that are there as antioxidants, they're there working with enzymes, they're there protecting one's health. But we don't know enough about them in order to really put them into our food supply. Some time ago, some of you might remember, we put beta-carotene into vitamin pills because there were good studies showing that carrots and dark green and orange vegetables were so healthy, and beta-carotene was the most likely reason why this was so. And so some very expensive, large clinical trials with control groups and interventions where people were given in a blinded way. They were given beta-carotene versus not, so nobody knew, the researchers didn't know, the individuals didn't know. Beautifully done trials, and not one, but more than one, had to be stopped because not only did beta-carotene not do what we had thought would be so likely to happen because the vegetables seemed protective, but in fact, the opposite actually occurred. Those that were receiving beta-carotene had a higher cancer incidence. So it was immediately taken out of all the vitamin pills. Beta-carotene is still thought to be a wonderful antioxidant. It's in those foods that we're to eat, but we don't know enough on the dosage and how to isolate and make sure that what we're putting in as a fortified substance is as beneficial as it is in the real food. So this was actually a very important turning point in the field of nutrition, is that while we knew a lot about vitamins and we'd been learning these, in the last century, we really have identified the vitamins. We know what happens when you don't get enough vitamins. We fortify many of our foods with vitamins, and we thought that we could really fix the food supply. So we all pictured that someday we'd probably be just eating pills with vitamins and how easy that'd be. We wouldn't have to take so much time to eat our foods. But now, with some of the newer chemicals that we're learning about, we're learning that we're not going to improve on Mother Nature. So I'm going to run through, we're going to talk a little bit about nutrition and obesity and promotion of health and prevention of disease. So I'm going to run through these maps that if you've ever seen the maps of the US, you will never forget them. And if you've seen them, you just enjoy seeing them again. It's about the obesity epidemic. How many of you have seen the maps of the US with the obesity epidemic? I am so impressed. That's about 40%, or should we check the clickers? I'd say 40%. So for those of you, you'll know just what I mean, that this is a way of really understanding why the field of obesity has changed so dramatically, why it really is a movement now, and people are working so hard to do things to improve the diets, especially of children, but also of adults too, and trying to deal with some of the issues that I know you're talking about in other sessions of your class. So I got this first slide here because it's just a pretty bar graph here for you. But no, because the maps are going to go quickly. So this is obesity trends, obesity prevalence among U.S. adults. This is collected with one of our big surveys, BRFIS it's called. We're going to start in 1991. And so the light blue stripe is the lowest prevalence, less than 10% of obesity in the population. The next blue is 10 to 14%, then 15 to 19%, then the yellow is 20, the orange is 25 to 30, and the next one is 30. So don't look at the numbers, just listen to what I say. There. Okay, so this is the first one starting in 1991 and just moving along very quickly with the lowest obesity prevalence, turning to the blue and crossing the states. So the blue is becoming much more important, and now the yellow. So we've now increased the rate by 5%. Every change in color is increasing the rate by 5%. Mississippi, of course, was the first state here to get the highest rate, and then Colorado is the one that's lagging behind with a lower obesity rate. But you can see that Mississippi wasn't there long on its own, and it's now increasing across the US. And now there's a red color, and that's the highest obesity rate in 2006, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So more than words can ever tell you, you can see the reason that policymakers are so interested in this topic, because not only is it increasing so rapidly, but the fact that there are costs associated with this increase. And you know, the picture I like to show with children is a figure that came out from CDC a little while ago, that 1 out of 3 children born in this decade will become diabetic in their lifetime if we don't do something. So much of the work that I do has to do with children and preventing this from happening. 17% of children right now are obese, and this is, you know, 300% of what it was 30 years ago. But for me, as a nutritionist, what's even more striking is that only 1 to 2% of our nation's children actually meet the dietary guidelines. And the pyramid was the old graphic, and now when the new dietary guidelines came out in 2010, they dumped the old pyramid and created a plate. So we will have to see if with some of these programs and policies that we've been working on in obesity, if we're actually going to be seeing some differences in this very low percentage of children in this country. So I often talk about how the fact that obesity may be impacting a smaller number of children, but all children can stand to benefit from improved nutrition. And if you're wondering what it is that you know, we're talking about with children not meeting the guidelines, this is a 12-year-old child, you know, having 6 ounces of grains, with half of them whole grains, 1.5 cups fruit a day, 2.5 cups vegetable. Yes, that's the problem. One of the big problems with milk, another big problem, 3 cups of milk or dairy a day, and then 5 ounces of meat or beans or protein alternatives. So within a whole day, with all the meals and the snacks, you know, children are not able to meet that. So in 1999, given that the state of child nutrition was really poorer than ever, and I'd been studying it for many years, the micronutrients hadn't gotten much worse. That's the vitamins and minerals, because of the new fortification and because of the fact that kids were eating more. Calories have gone up in this country. But the kinds of foods had so dramatically changed. So when I had an opportunity to start a Center for Weight and Health in 1999, I moved from the study of epidemiology to working on the development of interdisciplinary science-based solutions. And what that really means is that what we wanted to do was take the information that's in the university and translate it and take it out into the community, where so many groups were working on trying to get a handle on how to make some real positive environmental changes that would improve the health of children. So not only to take the information out, but also at the same time to take the issues into the university that needed to be studied. I call them strategic issues, issues that will really make a difference in what community groups and folks are doing in schools and other areas in WIC and in different institutions and different community settings that would make a difference. So we tried to really set it up so that we could do both, and we applaud the university for helping support a center like this, because I think you can do so much more with a big, robust center. And we now have about 30 to 40 people working on studies simultaneously on a lot of the federal food programs, on state issues, on local issues, with partners from Kaiser Permanente to the California Endowment to local organizations that are working. So we're just working on all different levels at the same time, trying to really make a difference and to support the work that's being done. So let me tell you about one of the very first studies we did, because this will show you the way in which the university can really support the obesity movement as well as a food movement, because we can do studies that really can make a difference. And we had no idea when we first took this on exactly how much of a difference it would make. But this was a pilot study to evaluate California Senate Bill 19, which had passed and been signed by the governor in 2001, and that was to reduce competitive foods in elementary and middle schools in California. But the School Nutrition Association was very concerned that if the school food service wasn't selling the foods, the snack foods and the beverages, that they would lose money, and they are already so stretched for funding. So part of this bill was to provide funding for the schools that would implement a reduction in snack foods that were higher in fat and sugar, and with beverages that were high in sugar. So we knew that what the biggest barrier was to this being actually implemented was that money that was going to be given to the schools if they would implement it. That we didn't have the money. We had the political will, which was fabulous in 2001. We were the first state in the country with this political will to do such a thing, but we didn't have the funding at that point. Does it sound familiar? That was true in 2001 as well as it is right now. So we did a study looking at many of the aspects of implementation in 16 schools, but we also zeroed in on what the big barrier was, and that was how much will this impact revenue. So 16 schools agreed to reduce, to follow the bill here and reduce their snack foods and change their beverages. And lo and behold, it surprised us as researchers, it surprised the School Nutrition Association, the School Food Service, the policymakers, and everybody else, because what we found was that most of the schools, nearly all of them, all but two, actually made as much money or more money after they quit selling the high-fat, high-sugar junk food and the sodas. So this is a little graphic to show you that we did this for every school to look at over the months that we followed these schools. You can see the pink line is the snack food. So, and the implementation of this bill that we did, it was right there in the middle where there's no data. So when you're looking at the left side of it, you can see that about the same amount of revenue is coming from meals and from snacks for the school food service. And the total is that blue line up on top when you add the two together. Then after it's implemented, they did some things like they put in a little international marketplace, so you see a big blip here that more people were eating school meals. At the same time, the snack food, of course, went way down because the kids just really didn't want the baked chips and the very low sugar beverages as much, so the revenues went down with the snack foods. But what happened was the meal revenue stayed up, and nobody expected this to happen, that the federal government actually provides funds for low-income children's meals, so that there was an infusion of money when kids quit eating chips and soda for their lunch and they started eating the school lunch. So this actually compensated for all the money that was lost. And so in 2005, after the study was done, the legislation was signed into law without any funding for schools in California, and we became the first state that had no sodas in K through 12. We actually piloted this in high school children too, to see how it would work in all the different levels. So K through 12, The snack foods were reduced, and the sweetened beverages were reduced. So this became a model for other states and other communities, and now across the nation, there's so many other communities that have followed suit. But most importantly, we did a study of the fitness gram. This is the data on BMI in schools in California. So we looked at it, we collected it for over a period starting in 2001 and went all the way up here to the 2009 period. And it's kind of hard to tell here because it's an enormous data set. And this is all the population of children in California at particular age levels. We measure it in 5th, 7th, and 9th grade in California. And this shows that when the legislation went into effect, that the slopes of the lines of change in BMI actually declined. So you could just barely see it going up, up, up until the line in the middle, and then just barely going down. But with millions of data points, California has over 1/7 of the children in the between 1/7 and 1/8 of all children in the US are in California. And these are measurements on all children in the state. So when you have such a big data set, you can actually see very significant changes in the slope. And when you're dealing with population-based approaches, these small changes make enormous differences. So this was one piece of legislation. We don't know if it was causal, but we do know that it coincided. And so it was very exciting to see what one can do with some very strategic evaluation. The next thing we did was we looked at menu labeling because we heard that a policy brief was needed right away on how much menu labeling makes a difference. Whether you put calories up on the menu board, will it make a difference? So we looked at all the literature from pilot studies and found out how many people actually go to fast food restaurants. This is for chain restaurants only. How many people then look at the calories, because a lot of people, only about 1/3 actually pay any attention whatsoever. Then out of those, how many do something about it, and then what it is they do, and how many calories that is. And we then modeled it for the state and showed that menu labeling could potentially lead to approximately 1 pound per person per year difference, reduction in 1 pound per person, if it was equally across all the population. So why menu labeling? One of the other things with one of our partners is the fact that we had to make sure that policymakers knew that it isn't as intuitive as you think. So I thought we could use our clickers here. Which of the following breakfast items that are served at Denny's restaurant do you think has the fewest calories? So can you use the clickers and get the answer right away? Okay, so how many of you think that ham and cheese omelet has fewer calories than country fried steak and eggs, 3 slices of French toast with syrup and margarine, or 3 pancakes with syrup and margarine? So ham and cheese omelet has the fewest calories. Click now. Will that work?
Yeah, just ask them which one they think.
Oh, okay, you have A, B, and C, D on your clickers? Oh, okay, just pick A, B, C, or D. Much easier. Okay. And the answer? Okay. Have you all clicked? Okay, so A is the most popular. Now, we hope it's not the most popular. It has the fewest calories, right? It could be the most popular if it really has the fewest calories, right? Okay, so by a big margin, or is it all about equal? Okay, so the most of you thought ham and cheese, then about half of that group thought country fried steak and 3 pancakes, and the least likely to have the fewest calories was 3 slices of French toast with syrup and margarine. Am I saying that correctly? Okay, this is not a trick. Yeah, so the country fried steak and eggs had the lowest calories. And if you feel badly about not knowing the answer, so they did this with nutritionists and dietitians and nurses and doctors, and it actually gets worse when you're trying to figure out how much fat is in a product. The calories are maybe even the easiest. We had examples all throughout. So between the kind of research that we were doing and the policy brief and this kind of a survey that was in the newspaper, California passed mandatory menu labeling for chain restaurants, and after it was actually put into the federal health reform legislation. So it shows that if the right information, if we can get information to policymakers, it really is valuable. And then I'm just going to mention one program here, because this happens to be a program that is near and dear to the heart of Alice Waters. This is the Chez Panisse Foundation's School Lunch Initiative. So this was a program that we evaluated at the Center for Weight and Health. And it has all the elements here that you can see in the circles here. But the two very strong ones are the hands-on gardening and the hands-on cooking, and then the integration with the curriculum, and of course the school food had changed dramatically in Berkeley Public Schools as a result of being part of the School Lunch Initiative. So a very innovative program. And Alice Waters herself said, I know the answer to this, what this program will do for children, but I need scientific data, I need the university, I need to have information that I can then share with others. So this makes one very nervous, because she did know the answer, and it was up to us to see if that answer was correct. And the good thing was, it was. She was absolutely right. And she may talk about this a little bit more when she gives her talk later in the semester. But knowledge changed, but food preferences changed as well. The kids, said that the yellow bar are those that were in the School Lunch Initiative program, where it was fully implemented, and the blue bar are those that are not in the program in the Berkeley Public Schools. So you can see that likability of kale, chard, and spinach, we just picked that for an example for you, because that's one you don't think of as kids improving their likability of those foods while they're in elementary school. Likability significantly went up, while it went down for kids not in the program. But more important than that was that changes in behavior actually occurred. Changes in the servings of fruits and vegetables per day. This is the one that people say, well, it's one thing to change their knowledge or change their attitudes, but will they eat more? Not only did they eat more while they were at school of fruits and vegetables, but that behavior translated into the home. So a very important study. Very important for her, Alice Waters, then to be able to go out and share with others that this has been shown to be the case, because now there's such a movement to improve the kinds of nutrition education and gardening and cooking experiences for children. So I'm going to tell you about one more piece of the work that we do here at the center and how we do it, and how we synthesize the research evidence. So that is going to be on the dietary factors as they relate to obesity. And so I'm just going to give you the process by where how we move and pick the areas that we're going to be working more on, or that we're going to be providing information to community groups. So the first thing you need to do is, there's so much information coming by magazines and newspapers and scientific articles. You need to identify the likely suspects of what kind of foods might be related to the development of obesity. So this is kind of a case study on how you would go through that list and actually figure out what makes a difference. And what we do then is we do a literature review, and we take national intake trends. How have the trends in certain dietary components actually compared with the dietary factor in question, and this, or the outcome in question, and this time we're talking about the increase in obesity. And how have the mechanisms changed? Is there actually a mechanism by which this could be related to the change in obesity that we saw, this dramatic change? We're looking for which dietary factors could explain it. And then we're looking at observational studies, just whether there's a relationship in a big study, a cross-sectional relationship between a dietary factor and obesity. And finally, we're looking at prevention trials, like that beta-carotene trial. And each one of these has some strengths and weaknesses. On the left are the strengths, and then on the right are the weaknesses. That national intake trend data really is valuable, showing how dietary behaviors have changed while obesity was becoming epidemic. But it isn't very likely to just be related to causation, but it's one of the many factors. And then for looking at the mechanisms, you can control for confounders, and you can really closely observe a relationship. But it's kind of an artificial setting, and you can't generalize much, but it is important to look at the mechanisms. And for observational, looking way over to the left, you can see that, well, causation can be inferred through longitudinal studies, and it's often nationally representative data. That's good. More likely to be a realistic approach to looking at a problem. But on the right side, it's difficult to control for all covariables, and dietary data and body fat data they're very imperfect proxies, and it's amazing that we've found any factors that are really significant now. It's very hard to measure those things. And then prevention trials are the best. It's really relevant to causation. The problem of covariates is reduced when you can do control groups, and especially if you can randomly assign them. But there is some self-selection bias, and certainly the type of intervention can be very variable. So if you just look, I'm going to just start with the case study on sweetened beverages, because that's one we talk about a lot on this campus right now, especially as we're changing, talking about beverage contracts and various things. So if you look at this data, this is just how soda drink production has changed over the period when obesity was going up so dramatically. So is that a trend or mechanism or observation? That's a trend, of course. And then you look at how the sweetened drink availability increased with children's consumption, or with people's consumptions of soda intake between 1985 and 2005, and dramatic increases when obesity was going up. So then you look at the portion sizes, and of course the portion sizes, as you can all remember, how that has gone up very dramatically from what it used to be. So all part of the trend data. And then you look at the relationship between soda consumption and kilocalories per day. This is just from looking at what's the relationship of having more soda to one's calories with nothing else changing. And you can see there's a relationship: more soda, more calories. People don't compensate fully. So that's a mechanism. And then when you look at this mechanism more carefully, you can see that liquid sugar, there's data showing that you don't get as full, you don't get as satiated from liquid sugar as you do from solid sugars, candies and sweets and foods like that. So only 9% compensation, not very full compensation. So for some reason, probably for many reasons, we don't compensate for liquid calories as well. It's absorbed quickly. The insulin response is different, which Rob's going to talk about. Metabolic rate is, in response to eating, is lower than with fluid calories. Thirst and hunger mechanisms are not fully integrated. Cognitively not as satisfying as dessert or extra food, and it's very palatable, the liquid sugar. So then we look at, for each additional serving of sweetened beverage consumed over 1.5 years, the risk of overweight increased by 60% in children. So this is now more than a trend, more than a mechanism. So now we're observing what happened in a free-living population. And in adolescents, a threefold increase in soda between 9 and 19 years. This is a study I was working on. High soda intake predicts increase in BMI. Again, observational, a good longitudinal study. Adults, women who drink soda or sweetened fruit drinks every day, more likely to gain weight and develop type 2 diabetes as compared to women who drink less. And finally, this is where the trial comes in. Adults were given, in an intervention trial, 3.5 servings per day of soda for 3 weeks. And after that, they were told to do nothing else. After that, they increased their total energy intake per day. They didn't compensate and eat fewer other things or drink fewer other beverages, and they increased their body weight. So the trial is certainly the icing on the cake. And when we then look at all the data for all of these topics that I showed you, we can then put it all together and talk about the intake trend, the mechanisms, the positive association, the prevention, intervention, the impact from trials, and we can conclude that reducing sweetened beverage intake is an excellent intervention strategy to prevent obesity. So that's kind of how we do the synthesis of the data that gives us the foundation for the research studies that we do to kind of further the policies and programs in the community. So these are the strongest evidence. I summarized, this is from the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. This came out in 2010, the new guidelines. These are guidelines jointly issued by the Department of Health as well as USDA. And this is the first time they've used an evidence-based framework to evaluate every article on all the topics and come up with what they said are the dietary factors with the strongest evidence linking it to obesity. So sweetened beverages, eating at fast food restaurants, portion sizes, the growth of portion sizes, and screen time. And screen time is more related to the embedded and the actual advertising as it in comparison to the physical activity, the sedentary behavior. And then moderate to strong evidence from the energy-dense foods, those are the high-fat, high-sugar foods, and the total calories. And moderate evidence with skipping breakfast being a risk factor for obesity, dietary fat, low whole grain diet, and food environment, and fruit and vegetable access, which I know you're talking about in your other sessions. So this is the first time we've used the evidence-based framework for the dietary guidelines. This is the first time they've dealt with as many foods, fewer nutrients, more foods. This is the first time they have really recommended doing something about obesity. Obesity is a way bigger part of the dietary guidelines this year in 2010. And it's also the first time that there's been such a focus on plant-based foods. So this is a very prestigious group, and these changes, it's like moving a great big ship, that we're seeing changes in the field of nutrition that are really coming out of, or at least in part, we're seeing the changes from these institutions, such as the Dietary Guidelines Committees. So, and one of the last things that they have done, which hasn't been a part of the guidelines in the past, is they talked about what we can do to change the environment to reduce body fat. So we can have nutrition education, which we haven't, that's been not as frequently in schools as it used to be. We can think about financial incentives to consume healthy foods. Right now, there's a program that's being piloted for food stamps, whereby if you spend money on fruits and vegetables, you get more food stamps. So it's an incentive to buy more. Restaurants and the food industry to offer health-promoting foods, sugar-sweetened beverages, and high-calorie snacks out of schools and recreational facilities, a very strong recommendation coming from this committee. Zoning policies that limit the location of fast food restaurants near schools and places where children live. So the exposure of children to an environment that really promotes, you know, their eating poorly and their adiposity is really a big part now of the recommendations that we can begin to work together on, because this very few, I mean, industry follows these as well as, you know, public health professionals and all kinds of nutrition professionals and others. So it's important that we see that the evidence is strongest on these areas and we can move forward. So I thought I'd end by looking just briefly at heart disease, another way to look at literature on heart disease. Sorting through all those conflicting medical studies, what have we learned and what should we conclude from all of the studies? So we at the Center for Weight and Health said that the Japanese, they eat very little fat, they drink very little red wine, and they suffer fewer heart attacks than the British or the Americans. And the French, they eat a lot of fat and they drink red wine, and they suffer fewer heart attacks than the British or the Americans. And the Italians drink large amounts of red wine, and they suffer fewer heart attacks than the British or the Americans. So we have concluded that if you eat and drink, you can eat and drink what you like, but speaking English is apparently what kills you. So thank you very much. change slides for you. Okay.
Let's see. No? Okay. All right. Okay. All right, well, first of all, can everyone hear me all right? Good. I want to thank Michael and Alice Waters and Pat and Nikki also for having me tonight. I'm going to try to follow up where Pat left off. This is called Ending the Debate, with wishful thinking at best. I was probably in a drunken stupor from all that red wine that Pat was talking about when I titled it. But let's see what we can actually look at. I'm much more interested as a physician, not just in obesity, but in this whole phenomenon that has occurred called chronic metabolic disease or metabolic syndrome. I don't know if you all know this, but 1 week ago today, the United Nations General Assembly declared that non-communicable disease, that is, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, dementia, was now a greater threat to the developing world than was infectious disease. And this means enormous changes in terms of resources and also in terms of policy and public health. This is a big deal. And the question, of course, is, how did we get here? What in the world happened? How is it that we now have 30% more obese people in the world than malnourished people? Something has changed, something very specific. If you look at the data that Pat showed you, that did not look, those maps of the US did not look like gluttony and sloth. That looked like an environmental exposure. That looked like what you see when a virus sweeps across the land, like a pandemic. Indeed, this is a pandemic because it's going on in other countries as well. So we need to identify what it is, what that exposure is, and then what to do about it. And I'm going to try to do that for you right now. So first of all, no disclosures. Anybody see this article? I venture to guess that this is the reason I'm standing here talking to you right now, is this article that appeared in the April 17th New York Times Magazine. You can get it online. This very specifically looks like cocaine, but it ain't. It's sugar, just plain old sugar cube, done very nicely, artfully. And the question is, what about it? Pat told you a little bit about sodas. I'm going to tell you a whole lot more about chronic metabolic disease, because I'm going to try to prove to you that this is the nidus, the big kahuna in this entire story that is being visited upon the world today. In order to be able to do that, I have to satisfy 3 criteria for you. Number 1, toxicity, that this is actually a poison. Sugar, a poison. It's natural. It's been with us for our entire time on Earth. How could it possibly be a poison? Well, I've got to show that. Abuse, sugar addiction. Now, there's a whole bunch of people out there who think that food addiction, and specifically sugar addiction, is a crock of hooey. We just wrote an article called Is Fast Food Addictive? And we pieced apart all the different portions of the fast food meal. Fat is habituating but not addictive. Salt is a non-issue. And it's all about sugar and caffeine. Caffeine's a starter drug. You all agree with that. And God knows I need my Starbucks right now. But sugar, and we're going to show you that data as well. And then finally, something called externalities. That is, what does your sugar consumption do to me? In smoking, we know what it does, right? Secondhand smoke. With alcohol, we know what it does. Car accidents that you didn't cause. What are the externalities involved in the obesity epidemic? Why do I care how obese you get and how many sodas you drink? So I have to solve that one as well, and I'm going to do that in the next 15 minutes. Good luck. All right, here's the past. This was 2001, 10 years ago. 6 million kids are seriously overweight. With all of the media attention, with all of the stuff that Pat is doing and the Institute of Medicine and Michelle Obama and the Edible Schoolyard and everything else, we're up to 20 million now. Not doing too hot. How about the present? Again, 30% more obese than malnourished people worldwide, 366 million diabetics in the world, 5% of the population, of the world's population. This is a disaster. And finally, the future. Experts predict 165 million Americans will be obese by 2030, and 100 million Americans will have diabetes by 2050. If you think that there's going to be health care when you guys need it, think again. That's the externality. You are so screwed. So what is it we're eating? Oh yeah, we're all eating more. 275 calories more in teen boys, 187 calories more in adult men, 335 calories more per day in adult women over the past 30 years. Everybody knows we're eating more. The question is, what is it we're eating? Is it fat? Nope. 5 grams, 45 calories, it's a wash. And here's the data. Secular trends in food intake. Here are the fats. Whole milk, way down. Eggs, oils, cheese, Basically, it's a wash. That's what the data says. We are not eating more fat. And as our percent consumption of calories from fat went from 40 to 30%, because the USDA, the AHA, and the AMA demanded this back in the early 1980s to try to prevent cardiovascular disease, look what happened. Our obesity prevalence and our metabolic syndrome prevalence and our heart disease prevalence has gone through the roof. Didn't work because it ain't the fat, people. What is it? Well, carbohydrate. 228 calories, 57 grams, there it is. And here's the carbohydrate right up here. Again, taken off through the roof. All those snacks you can get in your vending machine, that's what's causing that. And specifically, beverages. 41% increase in soft drinks, 35% increase in fruit drinks, fruit aids. I'm going to pass on that just in terms of time. Okay, here are a whole bunch of successful diets. At least somebody in this room has lost weight on every one of these. Okay? The Atkins diet, so appropriately named, right? All fat, no carb. The Paleolithic diet, anybody familiar with that one? Okay? Mediterranean diet, the exact opposite. The Japanese diet that Pat just talked about, all carb, no fat. Vegetarian diet, the Ornish diet. Low glycemic index diet, South Beach diet, the Learn diet, the Zone diet. These all work for somebody. Maybe not for you, but for somebody. The question is, what do they all share? There's two things, that they all share together. Every successful diet has two things. Low sugar, high fiber. Because sugar's the poison and fiber's the antidote. Here are the 10 most obese states. Pat showed you a figure just like this before. Here are the 10 laziest states. What's going on over there in Nevada? Yeah, I guess you can only burn so much energy going like this, All right? Here's the adult diabetes rate in America. And finally, here's soda per capita consumption. Notice anything? Now, that's correlation, not causation, as Pat talked about. But what is this stuff? Well, in America, it's this stuff right here, right? High fructose corn syrup. The most demonized food additive known to man. Everybody is absolutely convinced that this is the cause of the obesity epidemic, right? And what is it? Well, here's a glucose molecule. Everybody familiar with glucose? Very important. Your body will make it if you don't take it in. Right over here, 6-membered ring. And then over here we have this other one called fructose. Fructose is the sweet part of sugar. It's a 5-membered ring. That becomes important later on. But here's sugar, table sugar, cane sugar, beet sugar. 1 glucose, 1 fructose, same thing. Basically, it's a wash. And all the data where you compare the two head to head say it's a wash. It makes no difference. They're both equally poisonous. And we know that that's true because the rest of the world doesn't have high fructose corn syrup. They just got plain old sugar. But look at the world sugar consumption, tripling over the past 50 years. Brazil, highest per capita consumption, they now have the highest increase in the rate of new diabetes cases in the world. Okay, and here are the prevalence of diabetes 2010. You know who has the highest prevalence of diabetes? Saudi Arabia and Malaysia. Saudi Arabia and Malaysia have the highest? Are you joking me? How come? No alcohol. So what do you think they drink? So here's the secular trend in fructose consumption in America. Getting our fructose out of the ground, like our ancestors did in fruits and vegetables, we consumed about 15 grams a day. Prior to World War II, with the nascent candy and soft drink industries, we got up to about 20 grams a day. By 1977, before high fructose corn syrup had made it our shores, we were up to 37 grams a day, which was 8% of our total caloric intake. By 1994, 55 grams a day, 10% of our total caloric intake. And currently, adolescents, some of the people in this room, are consuming 75 grams a day, 12% of our total caloric intake. 25% consume 15% of their calories from fructose, double that for sugar. So when you do the math, that's 800 calories a day in sugar. And the question is, what does it do to you? Can you deal with it? Can your liver handle that? That's the question. Now, how did we come to this? Pat mentioned a few things, but I'm going to take you through sort of the history of this. This is the perfect storm that came from 3 political winds that blew it around the same time to create this veritable hurricane. The first, Richard Nixon in 1973 told his agriculture secretary, Earl Rusty Butz, love that name, that food should never be an issue in a presidential election. Anybody ever heard of Richard Nixon? Anybody ever heard of Earl Butz? Okay, tells you how old I am. Okay, take a look at this. This is from Time magazine a couple of months ago, called Hungry World, and what it is the percent of gross domestic product spent on food, country by country. Here we are at the cheapest, right here, at 7% of our gross domestic product spent on food. Here's the UK at 9%, and here's Australia at 11%. We are the fattest countries. How about that? Duh. But look at the ones in purple over here. They're all in revolution because they spend more than 35% of their calories on food. Nixon was right. One way to keep a populace in tow is to make food cheap. Indeed, it's true, and that's what we got. Next, the advent of high fructose corn syrup, which helped in this endeavor. Introduced to the American market in 1975, and here's what happened. Here's the U.S. Producer Price Index of sugar prior. Up, down, up, down. Volatility, bad for politics. Okay, now you get the corn sweeteners in here, and look, everything settles out. And it happened on the international stage here, too, at London, and when the U.S. price being half of that. And here's refined sugar versus high fructose corn syrup. It's half as expensive. So therefore, you can make 2-liter bottles. There were no 2-liter bottles before this. All right? No 20-ounce Cokes. It would cost too much. But now? So it's not that high fructose corn syrup is worse. It's that it's cheaper. And because it's cheaper, it started finding its way into everything, like hamburger buns, ketchup, hamburger meat. Do you know that they inject sugar under the skin of chickens in order to make them brown better? This is not good. So here's high fructose corn syrup going up, and the Corn Refiners Association, this is their slide, says, well, you know, it's just a wash because the HFCS went up, the sugar went down. It was just, we were substituting something that was less expensive. That's good for the economy. Not so, because here we had 73 pounds per year, and here it's 95 pounds per year, and there's something missing from this slide. Anybody know what it is? Juice. Because juice is sucrose, right? And we know that the juice servings per day correlates with change in BMI in inner-city Harlem toddlers. More juice, more weight gain. Duh. So here's, with juice now added, and here's most fructose items. Indeed, we are up to 140 pounds per year in sugar. 7 ounces for every man, woman, and child in America every single day. And the question is, what does that do to you? Well, that's what the rest of this is about. So the third political wind came with that admonition from the USDA, AMA, and HA to get rid of the dietary fat. Now, why did they tell us to do that? In the early 1970s, we discovered this thing called LDL, low-density lipoproteins, which we know is correlated with heart disease. In the mid-1970s, we learned that dietary fat raised your LDL. So if dietary fat's A and LDL's B, then A led to B. In the late 1970s, we learned that LDL correlated with cardiovascular disease. So we said that, well, B leads to C. So if A leads to B, B leads to C, then A must lead to C, then no A, no C. That was the logic. Anybody see any problems with that logic? This is Berkeley. You've got to have some logician here. Somebody. Okay, number one, A could lead to B, but B could lead to D, E, F, G, and H. Never come back to C. And number two, the contrapositive of a statement is not no A, no C. It's no C, no A. So the logic isn't even right. Faulty logic, and we have based 30 years of nutrition policy in America on this faulty logic. And here we are. So this is a missive that was written in 1972 by a guy by the name of John Yudkin, a British physiologist, nutritionist, who talked about all the evils of sugar, and everything he prophesied in 1972 has come to pass. And here's this guy over here named Ansel Keys, who did this thing called the 7 Countries Study. And he was interested in dietary fat as a cause of cardiovascular disease. Here's his data. Japan, Italy, England and Wales, Australia, Canada, US. Look, percent calories from fat, coronary disease rate. Looks pretty good, huh? Except for one thing. Japan, Italy, how much sugar they got? The occasional gelato? I mean, you know, that's for the Americans. Okay, the fact of the matter is the Italian diet is very devoid in sugar because Italy didn't have a sugar island. Any history buffs in here? Somebody, it's Berkeley. Come on. All right? So, and the second thing is, it wasn't the 7 countries study, it was the 22 countries study. Here they are. He picked the 7 that looked the best. Well, you can pick anything you want, you know. It can look good, or it can look the other way, or it can look like this. I mean, it doesn't matter. You know, the bottom line is, you got to do it right. And when you add the Maasai, the Inuit, the Tokelau, indigenous tribes, they eat straight fat, and they have very low heart disease rates. In fact, the Atkins diet has low heart disease rates when you do it right. No one does it right. Okay? I'll just pass this for time. So what did this lead to? This led to get rid of the fat, right? Fat-free fat. Snackwells. Okay? Problem is, when you take the fat out of the food, what happens? It tastes like cardboard. So what do you have to do? You have to put the sugar in. So Snackwells as an example. 2 grams of fat out, 13 grams of carbohydrate in, 4 of which are sugar. So this led to the low-fat craze. Now, the content of low-fat, home-cooked food you can regulate. Anybody home cook anymore? That's a problem right there. Oh, well, good, I'm glad. This is Berkeley. But low-fat processed food means substitution with carbohydrate. Well, which carbohydrate? HFCS or sucrose? And there's that Snackwells right there. Now, Berkeley Farms, okay, right here, okay? There's your 1% low-fat milk right there at 130 calories, 15 grams of sugar, all lactose, milk sugar. Here's Berkeley Farms 1% chocolate milk, 29 grams high fructose corn syrup, 190 calories. So when you drink a glass of chocolate milk, you're drinking a glass of milk and half a glass of orange juice. The question is that okay? Is it okay to take the fat out if all you're going to do is substitute the sugar? Is that okay? Is that a fair trade? Was that good for us disease-wise? Yes, no? Want to use your clickers? Here's what you need to know, okay? This is for all of you. Virtually every naturally occurring foodstuff in the entire world has one of the two, fat or carbohydrate. Virtually none of them have both fat and carbohydrate. You say, what about the fat-containing fruits, like coconut or olives or avocado? There's almost no carbohydrate in those. So it's either or. Only sucrose, or HFCS, has both fat because fructose gets converted to fat, and I'll show you that real quick, and carbohydrate, which is the glucose. Indeed. When we started putting fat and carbohydrate at the same meal, we became gourmets. And when we started putting fat and carbohydrate in the same food, we became gourmands. Everybody got it? This is about processed food, people, because processed food is high sugar, low fiber. And that's what we got. So, as far as I'm concerned, we've had our food supply adulterated with our tacit approval right under our nose. The addition of fructose for palatability, especially with the decreasing fat, and ostensibly as a browning agent, which is actually another issue, which I don't have time to go into, called the Maillard reaction. And if you any biochemists out there, you know that's the cause of stiffening of your arteries. And the removal of fiber for shelf life and for freezing, because you can't freeze fiber. Go home, take an orange, put it in your freezer, leave it overnight, take it out the next day, put it on your counter, thaw it, try to eat it, see what you get. What do you get? Mush. How come? Because the ice crystals form inside the cell wall, macerate the cell wall, so when it thaws, all the water rushes in, turns it into mush. You wouldn't eat that. Food industry knows that. But But if you squeeze it and freeze it, it lasts forever. Depreciation goes down. You can sell it for cheaper. It's a win-win, right? A win for who? A win for the food industry, a win for the US government to sell food abroad, but it's a lose-lose for you. And finally, substitution of trans fats, which Pat just touched on. Hardening agent increases shelf life. What's wrong with trans fats? Anybody know? Well, the reason trans fats were put into the food is because the bacteria can't digest it. Except for one thing, our mitochondria, the energy-burning factories in our cells, are refurbished bacteria. We can't digest it either. So it lines our arteries instead and increases cardiovascular disease risk. Now, we know that, and we're trying to get them out of the food. That's good. Here's the point. Fructose is not glucose. Common wisdom says sugar is just empty calories. And as long as sugar is just empty calories, the food industry wins. Because they'll say any food can be part of a balanced diet. Heard that lately? Indeed. That's true if it was a balanced diet, but it ain't. I just showed you it ain't. Hepatic fructose is completely different, and I'll show you why. Chronic fructose exposure alone promotes this thing called the metabolic syndrome. And worse yet, fructose tricks the brain into increasing total food consumption. That's the abuse part. Very quickly, consume 120 calories in glucose. 2 slices of white bread, quarter cup of rice. 80% of the calories, or 96, will be metabolized by all the organs in the body. 24 will hit the liver. Here's what happens to those 24. They end up here. Glycogen. Glycogen is liver starch. Glycogen is safe. Glycogen is what your liver wants to do with excess energy. Very little of it comes down here to the mitochondria. And the mitochondria, when it does it, it makes this stuff over here called VLDL, very low density lipoproteins. That's triglyceride. That's liver fat. So glucose can be turned into liver fat, but because you have a glycogen pop-off and you have all the organs in the body that can metabolize it, glucose is not particularly dangerous. Let's talk about something that is, ethanol. Ethanol is a carbohydrate. Here's the formula. But ethanol is also a toxin. It's 2 toxins in one. You wrap your Lamborghini around a tree, acute ethanol toxicity, and you fry your liver, chronic ethanol toxicity. Here's acute ethanol exposure. You're all at Berkeley. I'm sure you've all experienced it. Over here we have acute fructose exposure. Nada, because the brain doesn't metabolize fructose. So let's consume 120 calories in ethanol. Shot of Maker's Mark, my drug of choice. Okay? Here's 24 calories off the top, stomach and intestine, first pass effect, 10% off the top, and then the kidney, muscle, and brain will do the other 10%. There go 24 calories. 96 calories hitting the liver because only the liver can metabolize all that ethanol. And here's what happens to it. The ethanol comes in. Anybody see glycogen there? No glycogen. Comes straight down here to the mitochondria via acetate. And now you got lots of VLDL, lots of lipid, lots of liver fat, causing something called insulin resistance. And insulin resistance in the liver is what metabolic syndrome is all about. This is not good. And finally, now, the big kahuna, let's consume 120 calories in sucrose, 8-ounce glass of orange juice. So, 2 slices of white bread, shot of Maker's Mark, 8-ounce glass of orange juice. Equicaloric, but not equimetabolic, because they all get metabolized differently. So let's see what happens to the sucrose. So the glucose will do the same 20-80 split it did before, 12 out here, 48 out here. But the whole 60 calories of fructose have to be metabolized by the liver because only the liver can metabolize fructose. So here's what happens to the fructose. Comes in right here. See a lot of arrows. That you see. Okay? And it comes down here to pyruvate, and now you get lots of liver fat, lipid droplet, hepatic insulin resistance, inflammation, hyperinsulinemia, muscle insulin resistance, and obesity because the insulin drives the VLDL into fat here. Bottom line, this is metabolic syndrome right here. You're looking at it. All because the liver had to metabolize more substrate and there was no pop-off valve. Here's chronic ethanol exposure here. Here's chronic fructose exposure here, 8 out of 12. Same thing, because they're the same substrate, really. I mean, after all, where do you get ethanol from? Fermentation of fructose. It's called wine, right? We do it in Napa Valley every day, right? Anybody take first year biochemistry? right? Same thing. So the big difference is that for ethanol, for alcohol, we do the yeast does the glycolysis, the first step, and for fructose, we do our own. That's the big difference. Otherwise, number of calories hitting the mitochondria, that's your problem. That's what it's all about. So here we have a can of Coke, and here we have a can of beer. 150 calories both, slightly different formulation, but the same number of calories hitting the liver when you do the math. So we have this thing in America called beer belly. Well, guess what? Welcome to soda belly, because that's what my kids in my obesity clinic suffer from. Here are the 4 foodstuffs that bypass the glycogen step and end up at the mitochondria. Trans fats, branched chain amino acids, which you find in corn-fed beef, ethanol, and fructose. Not insulin regulated, no glycogen pop-off in the liver, and these are the 4 foodstuffs that have been specifically implicated in the pathogenesis of metabolic syndrome because they are not glucose. That's the problem. But that's what we got in our diet. Okay, that's the toxicity part. Now, very quickly, the abuse part. Junk food addiction may be clue to obesity, indeed. So how come everybody seems to know this except the doctors? Okay, here are a whole bunch of lay publications. Look at the sugar habits, suicide by sugar, sugar shock, food addiction, etc. Take a look at the brain of a control brain right here, the dopamine receptors. This is the reward center of the brain. The red is good. Look at the cocaine brain, way suppressed. That means you need more dopamine to get the same effect. Here's a control brain, here's an obese brain. Same thing. So is there really such a thing as sugar addiction? Well, you have to look for similarities to other drugs of dependence, nicotine, morphine, amphetamine, cocaine, cannabis, and the one I think is the most appropriate analogy is ethanol. Here are the criteria for addiction in animals. Binging, withdrawal, craving, and finally cross-sensitization with other drugs of abuse, meaning you expose an animal to one drug, get them addicted, then hit them with another drug they've never seen before, and they have the same response as the first drug, even though they've never seen it. Cross-sensitization, enhanced locomotion, and increased consumption. That's what you get. How about in humans? Well, here are the DSM-5 criteria for addiction right here. Tolerance and withdrawal, which is physiologic. And here are these others that are psychological dependencies here, which I'll let you read through really, really fast, because I don't have time for them. And I don't have audio, so I'm not going to show you this, but if you all go re-rent Super Size Me and go to day 18 of Morgan Spurlock's ordeal, he describes drug withdrawal from not having had his McDonald's for 4 hours. Go do it. Okay? That's the thing. So here's the point. We have toxic substances that are not abused. Iron, vitamin D, pseudoephedrine, these are, until you turn it into crystal meth, then you abuse it. But these are toxic substances that can kill you, but we don't abuse them, so they don't need regulation. They're in over-the-counter medicines. We have abused substances that are not toxic, like caffeine, nicotine, until you put it in a cigarette, and the tars will kill you. But when you have addiction medicine, where you have toxic substances that are abused, like morphine, amphetamine, cocaine, cannabis, ethanol, that's where public health comes in. That's where regulation comes in. And I would pose to you that sugar belongs on that list for all the reasons that I just described to you. And here's the deal. Just say no. Nancy Reagan's Just Say No did not work. Educational efforts alone have not reduced the use of any drug of dependence, because that's what addiction means, is you can't be educated. You got to be rehabbed, right? But we don't got no sugar rehab. And finally, the last, and I'll be done. Societal interventions require externalities. So if you smoke, drink, or take drugs, it's bad for me. Secondhand smoke, car accidents, declining house prices, altered work productivity, and absenteeism. Bad for me. We regulate alcohol, we regulate tobacco, we regulate street drugs. So how does your obesity affect me? 274 million extra for jet fuel? Discomfort on the subway? Sinking of boats due to the weight. Everybody remember Lake Champlain, Plattsburgh, New York? It was coded for 140 people, not 140 obese people, sank in 2003. Don't laugh. Nah, here's why. 65 billion reduction in work productivity, 50% increase in absenteeism, 50% increase in health insurance premiums. Each of you pay 50% more in health insurance because of obesity. Are you happy about that? I'm sick to death over it, okay? Because I can't get my kids' growth hormone, okay? And because this is chewing up the entire healthcare system. 150 billion in waste in healthcare resources. Obesity is a threat to national security. 3 surgeons general now say that they can't staff the armed forces because of obesity. Okay? Did everybody see the, actually I think I might have it. I'll see if I have it. A cartoon from the Sunday Chronicle. The point is that each of these on this list used to be a personal responsibility issue, until it became so overwhelming that it became a public health issue. Syphilis, cholera, lead poisoning, TB, foodborne illnesses, vitamin deficiencies, AIDS and pollution. These are all now public health dilemmas because everybody gets them, because it's an exposure in each case. Now, you want to say AIDS is personal responsibility? Get a life. Okay? The point is, this is a huge deal. Well, we've got the same thing. We've got the same thing with sugar. So who's winning the war? Here's the economic downturn of 2008 right here, and here's the Standard & Poor 500 right here. Here's McDonald's, Coke, and Pepsi. They're doing just fine, thank you. Indeed, they are making money hand over fist. How come? Because when you sell legal, addictive substances legally, you make a lot of money, indeed. Okay, and here's General Mills, Hormel, ConAgra, Kraft, Procter & Gamble, all doing better than the S&P as well. At the American Heart Association, we've turned this around. Remember, they were the ones who said eat low fat. Well, now they say eat low sugar, and I was happy to be part of this group. We now recommend reduction in sugar intake from the median in this country of 22 teaspoons a day to 9 for males and 6 for females. Easiest way to do that, get rid of the sodas and get rid of the juice. Okay, finally, Michelle Obama. Nice lady, misguided. Because she says focus on the individual, focus on the family, and focus on the community, but leaves government and the food industry out. Indeed, they don't want the fight. They can't have the fight because 25% of US exports are food. What do you think would happen if all of a sudden we came out and said, you know, all that sugar we've been putting in all our food for the last 25 years, you know, it really isn't so good for you? What happened when that one downer cow went from Canada to Washington State? Wasn't even our friggin' cow. That was the end of meat sales to Britain and South Korea for 2 years. You think that that's okay? So here's the question I leave you with. Can our toxic environment, our joint pandemic exposure, be changed without government or societal intervention, especially when there are potentially addictive substances involved? That's the question that all of you as Berkeley undergrads and visitors have to ultimately cope with for the next generation, because I'll be dead by the time you get this figured out. For further reading, I would recommend any of these: Fast Food, Central Nervous System, Insulin Resistance, and Obesity. This just coming out now, Is Fast Food Addictive? The Role of Fructose in the Pathogenesis of Non-Alcoholic Fatty Liver Disease and the Metabolic Syndrome, and Fructose Metabolic Hedonic and Societal Parallels with Ethanol. And in 2013, a book called Fat Chance, Gambling on Our Personal and Public Health, which I am writing now. I want to thank my collaborators at UCSF, all of my colleagues at the Weight Assessment for Teen and Child Health Clinic, UC Berkeley, there you are, Pat, right there, can't miss you, and also the Institute for Health Policy Studies, who's helping tie the sugar epidemic to alcohol, because we can learn a lot from alcohol and how our alcohol control policies have impacted sugar consumption around the world. And I thank you, and I will be happy to answer questions. Sorry, it's a little late.
All right, folks, we don't really have time for questions and answers. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take 2 thoughts from the audience, and then we'll see if we can do a lightning round of last thoughts. So 1 and 2. I'll take yours too. We're going to do 3 last thoughts. Okay, go ahead. Great.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to clarify
So when it comes to juice, what's the actual issue? Is it taking out the stuff of the fruit, i.e. smoothies has more of the stuff of the fruit than juice does? Second question over here. Yes. Are diet drinks a better option for soda drinkers because they have less sugar? I guess. Or do artificial sweeteners versus sugar? Great, thank you. And back there, go for it. Okay, so artificial sweeteners versus sugar. What about that? Good questions, thank you.
Go ahead.
Me first?
Nope.
Okay. All right, let's take the fruit and juice one first. Okay? Fruit is good, juice is bad. What about smoothies? And smoothies suck. And here's why. The good part of the fruit is the fiber. In addition, Pat talked to you about the phytochemicals. The phytochemicals go in the fiber fraction. Now, there are two kinds of fiber. There's insoluble fiber, like cellulose, like celery, and there's soluble fiber, like psyllium, like benefiber, or, Metamucil and all that stuff you put, okay? When you juice a fruit, you destroy the insoluble fiber. The soluble fiber is still there, but the insoluble fiber goes away because you shear it into smithereens and it's not there anymore, okay? So you destroy it. You need both in order to limit the rate of carbohydrate and fat absorption from the gut across the intestine into the bloodstream. Because what that does is it reduces the rate of flux that your liver sees so that your liver has a chance to catch up. In addition, that fiber delivers energy to the large intestine. Instead of it all being absorbed in the small intestine, it gets delivered to the large intestine where the bacteria there turn them into short-chain fatty acids. Now, that also happens to release hydrogen sulfide. So in my world, it's either fat or fart. But the fact of the matter is that by reducing the rate of flux across the intestine, the fiber is actually good for you. That's why fiber's the antidote. Problem is, as soon as you juice it, the fiber's gone. So eat your fruit, don't drink it.
And artificial sweeteners?
Why don't you do artificial sweeteners?
Oh, okay. Yeah, there is definitely not enough data on all of the new artificial sweeteners that are coming and coming and coming, but there is no data showing that they prevent obesity, that they are positive in any way other than if you can just replace a sweetened beverage, gram by gram. But usually that's not what happens. So the very intensity of the sweetness of those artificial sweeteners seems to, in some studies, really continue that appetite for sweetness. It's not, that's not across the board. So they don't have a positive or a negative rating yet in the scientific literature. But there's enough evidence, I think, that could be related that I think we should just really, really work on water and alternate beverages that actually improve the health, because we're so low. 40% of our calories are added sugars and fats, so they bring no benefit nutritionally. So if our beverages actually could bring nutritional benefit, we could really improve the diet for prevention of chronic disease rather than just kind of making it a wash with artificial sweeteners. So, Rob?
Well, I completely agree. Here's the way to think about it. There's something called pharmacokinetics, and there's something called pharmacodynamics. Now, pharmacokinetics is what your body does to a drug. Pharmacodynamics is what a drug does to your body. They're not the same. We have all the pharmacokinetics for all the diet sweeteners because the FDA says we have to have them. They won't approve any of them for general use unless you can show the pharmacokinetics. We have none of the pharmacodynamics. We don't know what Splenda does to your insulin. We don't know what azosulfame K does to your ghrelin. We don't know what any of them do to your long-term food intake. And there's a reason why we don't know. Because the food industry doesn't have to do it to satisfy the FDA. So they don't, because it can't help them. It could only hurt them. Okay? So the NIH should pay for it, right? And you know what the NIH says? It's the food industry's job. So we're at an impasse. There is no data. And until there's data, we can't recommend them. So they might be okay. I'm not saying they are okay. I'm just saying the jury's still out.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank both Pat and Rob for doing such a spectacular job. You just got a terrific overview of the state of research on obesity and the causes of it. And I think you should reflect back on the Marion Nessel lecture. And although we didn't have a chance to kind of explore it, there's some real differences of opinion here. You were hearing from Robert in particular the idea that all calories may not be created equal, and that because of the way some of them are metabolized, they're much more serious problems. And that is a different point of view than what she was suggesting. So I think that that's something worth digesting. And that's a big issue right now in obesity research, whether it's simply a matter of thermodynamics, energy in, energy out, or is it a more complicated mechanism. But in terms of a 90-minute introduction to the science and policy issues and economic issues behind obesity, I don't think you could do better. So let's thank our guests and look forward to next week.
Thank you.